Welcome back to Issues of Faith. We have with us Professor Jacco Hamman with Vanderbilt Divinity School, who's just written a new book, The Millennial Narrative. It also has a sermon outline, even some music attached to it that we'll talk about in a moment. But how do churches reach out to and engage millennials using this little-known book, the Book of Joel? What does Joel tell us again? Why you kind of answered that about Joel, but dig deeper into Joel.
Yeah. So the story of Joel, Ben, can be summarized as there was a people whose lives got destroyed by locusts. These people gathered because loss pushes us into isolation. Gathering is the first reaction we can actually empower ourselves to do when loss sets in. Loss isolates, we gather. So Joel says, gather when the locusts come in. And then Joel introduces the most beautiful God that I think everybody wants to meet. And that's the God who's gracious and compassionate, slow in anger, and abounding in love. This same God comes back and says, I will repay you for the years that the locusts have eaten. It is a beautiful God. Joel is the only prophet that we have that does not care about personal sin. That's typically what we think of prophets, showing on sin. Joel does not care about sin. For a people who are destroyed by locusts, sin is not a main focus that you have to address. So this God comes in and says, I'm loving, I'm gracious, I'm compassionate, I will repay you. And then the restoration that unfolds is beautiful because Joel says God pours out God's Spirit on all people, young and old, men and women, even free and enslaved, all people. I mean, so even in that text, God is breaking all kinds of binaries and boundaries. And I think that's what our young people are teaching us as well, just breaking these boundaries over and over again. Then God comes in Joel and says, we will be held accountable for our choices and our actions, whether it's with climate change or whatever, we will be held accountable. Now in Joel, that's typically called the day of the Lord, but I follow some scholars and others who argue that it's really about accountability. And so I unpack that a little bit. And then the book of Joel ends, the story ends with water that will run from God's throne, and water, basically acacia trees. But this image is really a beautiful image because the ancient Near East people believed if you're a king, you have to live by a river. Kings live by rivers. That's where their palaces are. Now the Israelites, of course, their God didn't have a palace. So what did they do with that sort of knowledge that kings live next to big rivers? They argued that water flows from God's throne, God's temple, God's house. It's named in various ways in Scripture. And it's an iconic theme, actually. The very last chapter of the book of Revelation, which is the very last chapter in Scripture, has the same image of water that flows. So Joel says, you who know loss and trauma, gather. Come together with friends and people. Discover this compassionate God who will restore. Know that you will be held accountable and make a difference in the world. And I think that is the most beautiful story that people can live into.
Why has it not gotten more attention? Why do so many people not know about it?
That's a great question. Even in scholarship, the book of Joel is so neglected. The book of Joel was not taken up in lectionary texts where many congregations will use the lectionary text to preach on a Sunday. A little bit of it comes in around Pentecost, but it's just an unknown. Part of it also, Ben, is that we know so little. For instance, we don't know who Joel was. And we don't know because the text says that he was the son of Pethuel, but we don't have an idea who Pethuel was either. So he's this unknown figure, Some scholars talk about him as the stepchild in a sense, He was just sort of like left out. But what is so beautiful about it is that he offers us a vision for a new reality that I think you and I want to live into.
And it's a way, again, to reach out to young people. and you've put together these sermon outlines. Discuss one or a couple of those. I'm interested in accountability. This shows young people do want accountability.
Yeah. So at themillennialnarrative.com, which is the book's website, pastors or youth ministers, they will find 6 sermon outlines where I did all the heavy lifting for them in terms of the Hebrew text and the context and those kinds of things. And I believe that this is the most powerful story narrative that people need to hear. So of course pastors have to preach about these things. So they can go there and find that. So an accountability, I show them how God has always been a God that holds us accountable. And that's sort of the paradox, where this loving, compassionate God who is slow in anger and abounding in love also holds us accountable. But Joel says that those folk who know this compassionate God need not fear accountability. It's not a fear that you need to have what's coming your way. So in that sermon outline, I address a theme such as the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs, because millennials are YIMBYs, yes in my backyard. A lot of other folk in our society is NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And a good example will be affordable housing. Most people will say, hey, affordable housing is a beautiful thing. We need affordable housing here in Nashville. But just don't build that complex in my neighborhood.
Right.
Go across town and do it over there. Mm-hmm. What I find with millennials is that they are eager to say yes in my backyard. Let's do it here. Let's create the change here, not over there.
And also as part of this, you've put together music, right? There's music that accompanies this with a Nashville singer-songwriter. What about that part of it?
Yeah, Christopher Williams is a musician here in the city, and he collected a bunch of friends who basically, my challenge to them was, here's a book, there's 6 chapters. I want 2 songs on every chapter. I'm not naive. I don't think millennials are going to read my book. This is a book for pastors and leaders. Okay. So they're not going to read my book, but I believe they have to get the story of Joel. So how do they get that? They can listen to music and get the same story. So We Will Remember is the album. It's on Spotify and iTunes and all the places where you stream and download music. But it is a beautiful album because it's the first one that we know of that sings the whole book of Joel in a modern idiom.
Thank you. I mean, this is fascinating. I could talk a lot longer about it, but again, here's the book. We'll show it, The Millennial Narrative. Professor Jacco Hamman, thank you for being here.
Ben, thank you.
Great talking with you. Thanks for watching Issues of Faith. Have a great day, everybody.